biome is a major generalized habitat. Listen. So when we look across the face of the Earth, we see that even though the organisms that live here in the United States differ from the ones that would live in like Europe or Asia, we can see some similarities between those. And we look at the ecosystems as a whole, there's ones that kind of match up as far as the certain types of organisms that live there. And there's two major factors that seem to go into what type of organisms will settle in an area: the temperature and the rainfall. So each of these biomes we're going to look at over the next few minutes are going to be able to be separated based on those two factors: what their average temperature is throughout the year and how much rainfall they get. So, first one is the tropical rainforest, also known as the jungle. So the tropical rainforest is a biome that has a high temperature, average temperature, it's hot, and it has a high amount of rainfall during the year. It is also a place that has high biodiversity. In fact, it is thought that every year thousands of organisms go extinct without us ever knowing about them in the rainforest because there's just so many different species. The reason why there's high biodiversity is because there's lots of resources. So this is a picture of the Amazon. The Amazon is a tropical rainforest. If you ever visit a tropical rainforest, it's not worth really trying to stay clean and not sweaty. It's not going to happen. As soon as you walk half a block, you're going to get soaked.
And when you get a tropical like desert, from your sweat or just from
from the moisture in the air.
Have you been there?
I've been to Costa Rica to the it was very humid enough. But there's lots of cool stuff to see in tropical rainforest because of all that biodiversity. Okay? Because of the temperature, we tend to see tropical rainforests in areas that are near the equator. Oh yeah. Biodiversity. So these regions here are where we would see tropical rainforests. Okay, now we don't see it just a band that runs across where the equator is because the moisture part is important. But we can see Amazon in South America and up through, I mean this wouldn't be the Amazon, but tropical rainforest up through a little bit of Central America, through a major swath of Africa, and then all these islands in Malaysia and Indonesia. Sick of that thing. And all be examples of where tropical rainforest would be found. Okay. Next is deserts. Deserts are also very hot, but they are also very dry.
Except for Antarctica.
It's sometimes referred to as like a desert because it doesn't really get any precipitation to it. But of course, deserts. Deserts are places that have low biodiversity, not many species. Now, there are some species that have found ways to live there, but overall they are very low in biodiversity because there's few resources, because it's very dry and plants don't grow there very well. Okay. So this is what we typically think of as a desert. Most deserts actually look more like this. Okay. There's scrub brush. There are some plants, maybe some cacti.
So do any deserts really look like the first one?
Yeah, there are places in the Sahara Desert that definitely look like that, but it's kind of one of those things where you see this picture and you think of miles and miles of sand that looks like that. And it's more like, oh, there's this area over here that looks like that. Then surrounding it is stuff that's more like this. We can still see, I mean, there's not a whole lot of life here. It'd be pretty specialized to make a life in a desert.
Actors.
What's that?
Specialized.
Yes. Specialized so you hang on to their moisture. Okay, here's where you would find deserts in the world. So a good chunk of the Australian outback is desert. We also have most of northern Africa, the Sahara and the Kalahari deserts there. Okay, the Mojave Desert over in western North America. The Atacama Desert in South America, one of the driest places in the world. The Gobi Desert in northern Mongolia and China. So a little bit more spread out, because it more has to do with rainfall and precipitation than it does the temperature. They tend to be more hot, on the hotter average than some of the other dry biomes. Okay, the next one is savanna. Savanna is warm, not hot. It's not as hot as most desert climates or tropical rainforest climates. It's not quite as dry as a desert, but it's still fairly dry.
That works. She doesn't.
Yes.
Go on, Jaguars.
Jaguars are South American. They tend to live in the jungle.
Now watch the video.
So when we think of lions and zebras, tigers live in the jungle. Lions and zebras, that kind of stuff, cheetahs, it all takes place on the African savanna. Okay, the savanna has grass, a few trees, but they're very far apart because it takes a lot of moisture to raise a tree in its first few years. We find most savanna areas in Africa, but there is some parts of India and northern Australia where you find these types of regions as well.
Why?
So does it have a lower
Yeah, kind of medium. As far as biodiversity goes, yeah, average. I don't know if you want to say that. I just want to point out that the tropical rainforests tend to have the highest, and deserts have the lowest. Okay, the next is the temperate forest. Temperate forests are cool and wet. Forest thing tells us there's lots of trees. So this is from the Appalachian Mountains in Tennessee, but a lot of the United States, especially the eastern United States, would fall into the temperate forest category.
What's your favorite type of forest? Different or deciduous?
Oh. Trees tend to spring up when there is more moisture because the first few years as the tree is growing in height, it takes a lot of water to keep it. That's why unless you find places where people planted and watered them or near a lake or something, you don't find too many trees around here because we just don't get enough rain to sustain it. But in the eastern United States and the western off by Seattle, and then most of Europe, or a good portion of it anyway, and then a lot of China and up into like North and South Korea. All those areas, excuse me, are going to be considered temperate forest. Okay, the next one, prairie, grasslands. Yes, this area would be considered grasslands or prairie.
Are those pretty interchangeable?
Yes. Okay, grasslands are cool and they're fairly dry. We do get rain, but not near as much as like a temperate forest. When I lived in Tennessee, I made it rain 2 or 3 times every week. Like a cooler savanna, yes. Okay, but because of the grass, we tend to have in prairie areas fertile soils that are good for growing crops, which of course is why you see so much agriculture around here. Okay, but of course one feature, or I should say lack of feature, that we tend to have in the grasslands that drives a lot of other people crazy is not really any trees. You see long stretches of area with very few trees just kind of here and there. Not big forests like in the temperate areas.
So we're more grassland than temperate, aren't we? We're on like the very edge of everything.
Yeah, I mean, as you move, especially northeast into Minnesota, it turns into temperate forest. Okay, so here's some areas where you would find grasslands. So we can see the African savanna turns into grasslands, and then that turns into desert. So there's this whole kind of shift as you go north through Africa. A major portion of Russia and Western Asia is grassland as well. Some in Australia. So like the Ukraine, major place of crop, especially wheat production, could be right in here. Okay, the next is taiga.
Not the rapper.
Taiga is a very cold biome. It has very harsh winters. It does warm up in the summertime. It's also very wet.
Wet. Yeah.
Yes. Because of that, we tend to not see any deciduous type trees up here. Most of the trees are going to be coniferous. Okay. And this is going to be kind of the coldest where you will find long-term plant production. At least big plants. So if you go any colder than this, then trees can't even survive. So we tend to find taiga areas in northern Canada and northern Russia and Europe. If you ever go fishing in Canada or something like that, you'll probably go into an area like this. There's lots of lakes up there that have a very similar structure and features to them. Lots of coniferous trees, not a whole lot else. So here's areas where we see taiga in the world.
Like all of Canada.
Yeah, a good portion of it.
Greenland is, and that's grassy because it's
Greenland's mostly glacier.
It was sarcastic when I said I was
tundra, dry, very cold.
So this is more like Antarctica.
Antarctica would be Arctic.
It's like Alaska.
So tundra, it has a very short growing season. There's some very shallow-rooted plants that are able to grow in the first couple of inches of soil. But there's a layer called the permafrost, which never thaws out. You know, here in the springtime, we have to kind of wait for the frost to go out of the ground. People talking about that, especially if you eat the olive green. And that never happens in the tundra. Okay, it will thaw a ways down, but there's a whole section of the ground that stays frozen all year round.
So a lot of their stuff is like fish.
A lot of their stuff.
They like icebergs.
Okay, here's a picture that kind of shows the tundra area. No trees. I mean, there's a little bit of plants and stuff, but it's very barren. But there are animals that live there. Arctic fox, and so a bunch of rodents, caribou, wolves. They all live up on the tundra. Okay, here's another look at it. So you can see some shallow-rooted plants, but it's pretty rocky. There's not a lot of dirt built up because there's not a lot of organisms that live and die, and the ones that do die don't get broken down very quickly because, of course, it's really cold most of the year round. It's very shallow soils. Now, I couldn't find a good picture that showed a map, so I kind of drew these lines on here. The green part would show the taiga and the tundra together, but above the blue line would be the actual tundra areas. So we can see a little bit of Greenland would be tundra. But the rest of Greenland and Antarctica would fall into the polar caps. The polar regions are extremely cold, but they're also dry.
People go there, don't they? Like,
Oh, yeah.
do experiments.
There's, at the South Pole, there's we don't really call it a permanent station because nobody stays there permanently, but I mean, there's a building there. People are there year-round doing experiments. They come in and out.
So, like, how cold?
In the wintertime, like negative 160 to 170.
So there's no way there.
Oh, yeah.
How do they live?
Heaters.
Okay, but how do you, like, they go outside? Like, they walk outside with the experiments.
They do go outside at times, depending on the experiments they're doing and what they're doing. They have really good clothes.
Penguins walking around like full of coats.
I love penguins. Yes. But I mean, they tend to have like goggles and they keep completely covered. You wouldn't want to make exposed skin.
You did that one perfectly.
So, Antarctica, even though it's covered in ice, hardly ever snows there. It's like it's too cold for clouds to form condensation to make it snow. So, really all the ice and stuff there is caused because the cold temperatures freezing pack ice. But this is what it looked like in 1980. It does not look like that anymore because of global warming. Global warming is melting the ice caps. Now, I would like to clear one thing up that TV tends to screw up for a lot of people. Never be. They are as far apart as species could be on the face of the planet. Polar bears are in the north pole, penguins all, and really there's not that many penguins in the south pole around Antarctica. Most penguins actually live on islands of South America and Australia. Yeah, if you watch Happy Feet, they go all that.
I hate that one. Me too. It's so long. How long is it?
But these organisms are ocean dependent. Okay? There's there's no actual life in Antarctica or on the polar ice caps. There's no plants that grow there. They are dependent on catching things from the ocean. So, of course, penguins catch fish, polar bears fish and seals.
Why does everything eat seals? Just don't. Sharks eat seals and polar bears eat seals.
Seals.
Humans eat seals eat the seals.
Seals eat all sorts of things as well.
And what they eat seals? Bacteria.
Are they baby seals? What does seal eat?
Plankton. Plankton.
Seal food?
Now, one thing about Antarctica is there's lots of countries that kind of have a stake there as far as research goes, but nobody actually owns Antarctica. They have carved out pieces and go, well, this is kind of where we're going to work, and this is where this country's going to work, and this and that. But nobody's actually laid claim and say we are trying to own Antarctica.
Has anyone ever went to war because they put their ice?
No, because there's nothing there to fight over. Now, if they were to discover oil or something in the middle of Antarctica,
Oh, we're screwed.
then something would definitely happen. But for right now, Antarctica is kind of just this big, peaceful commune for research. So, there's a polar bear. Trying to find.
Did he really?
Find food. Of course, all of those were terrestrial biomes, land organisms. There's all sorts of aquatic biomes. We have freshwater lakes, what we're most used to. And freshwater just means that it's not salty. Doesn't necessarily mean clean. So Tokwa would still be considered freshwater.
Hey, it's clear right now.
Yeah. No algae or anything.
Travis
Travis, I know.
Travis kind of a dirty, right?
It's disgusting.
It's almost clear.
So fish, obviously, we think of, but there's all sorts of other organisms that live in freshwater lakes. There are freshwater clams.
Yeah,
There's,
bats.
thank you. There are all sorts of insects. And there's a lot of terrestrial biomes that occur around these lakes that are dependent on them as well.
It's not supposed to be ocean.
The ocean is much bigger, and that's where life originated, so it's had a lot more time to evolve there. So we see some more spectacular things in the ocean. Sharks. Okay, sharks are actually fish. They're just what we call cartilaginous fish. They don't have any bones in their body. They're all made out of cartilage. But they breathe. They breathe oxygen out of the water using their gills. Squid. I don't know. Anglerfish. Anglerfish are pretty awesome. They got this little thing that hangs out the front of their head that, thank you, that has some bacteria inside of it that will actually glow, and they use it as kind of a lure because other fish will come up and investigate this thing that's glowing, and then the anglerfish eats it.
Is that one of our relationships that we talked about?
That would just be predation. Oh, you mean the bacteria inside?
Yeah.
That would probably be that would be mutualism.
Symbiosis.
Yeah.
Because the fishes feed the bacteria. Or like
They're given it a place to live.
bacteria
Yep. Absolutely. The other weird thing about anglerfish is that a male, this is a female, a male will come up and like clamp onto the side of the female, and then his body will like melt into hers, and that's how they fertilize. It's kind of weird.
And then so how does he get old?
No, he doesn't.
I've never watched PBS.
One-time thing.
That's really sad. Can we look that up? Like,
Yeah, let's watch
video or something?
Maybe.
It's on.
Now, In the ocean, we talked about this before, there's some cool biomes that occur during around these black smoker vents where they're not dependent on the sun at all. There's whole ecosystems that live there based on chemoautotrophs. Yes.
Good job, Marley. That's actually like the only thing
What about heteroautotrophs?
It's not a thing.
Trying to start this door. I'm sitting with it.
Sorry. So, of course, as far as the oceans go, I mean, we say there's 4 oceans. Okay, I guess. There's one big ocean, right? It's all connected.
Yeah.
Well, we're one big.
We're all related.
Okay, but there are areas where the ocean and the fresh water that comes off of streams and rivers meet, and they create what's called an estuary. So in an estuary, you have fresh water that is flowing into salt water, and the mixing creates what we call brackish water. Brackish water isn't as salty as salt water, but it's not as unsalty as fresh water. It's a mix of them.
So is there like different animals that?
Yes, there are different organisms that really do well in the brackish water, in the estuaries, that wouldn't really survive in the ocean, wouldn't really survive in fresh water very well. And of course, there's organisms that go back and forth. The salmon, especially up in Canada and Alaska, they spend their time out, most of their lives out to sea, out in the ocean in salt water. And then in the springtime when they want to spawn, they go upriver in the fresh water to lay their eggs.
There's a freshwater shark.
Are freshwater sharks. So certain organisms live very well in estuaries. You see lots of herons and things like that. We also see these mangroves. Mangroves are trees that actually are only able to survive in brackish water. They have evolved to be able to tolerate the slightly saltiness of the water there. So you find these mangrove swamps in like Louisiana and Mississippi, around the deltas there. Okay. So here's some major estuary areas in these bays where rivers run out of the mainland carrying that fresh water. We have these large biomes where certain organisms are able to make their lives.
Would swamp areas be like?
Yeah, I mean, estuaries are definitely swampy, and so like the Florida Everglades, that we think about the swamps there, that is an estuary, but just because it's a swamp doesn't mean it's an estuary. It has to have that mixing of salt and fresh water. So this kind of shows a conglomeration of all those maps that we looked at before as far as the different biomes go. They've broken a couple of them down a little bit more.
Why did you even put that on our slide? So that is just me because we can't tell the difference.
I'm just showing it to you.
Between the shades of gray.
Okay, and this kind of shows the relationships here. We can see like a tropical seasonal forest, tropical rainforest. Really, they have about the same amount, or the same average temperature, excuse me, but they've got a different amount of precipitation. The tropical rainforest gets a lot more. So here would be taiga, here would be tundra. Temperature goes down as you go across this way. So that's pretty much all I have as far as biomes go. I do have a video that we're going to watch about some interesting sea creatures.